Okay, getting everything set up and ready to go. Today I am going to be doing conspiracy. So before I get started, I do want to make sure that the audio is working and that everything is working properly. So let me come in here and test this out. I'm not hearing anything. It sounds like it's all good on. Sounds like it's good on uh, Rumble. Sounds good on Kick. Sounds good on D Live. It's up and running on X and sounding good. And now hit refresh on YouTube and go in and check that out. While that's going, I can test Twitch and it sounds good. YouTube YouTube sounds good as well. So, like I said, today is going to be another episode of Conspiracy. So, with that, I am going to do like it was suggested of me and not spend long periods of time in the pre show, just do the audio test. I couldn't give up on testing the audio just so you got to know. You know what I mean? It's something that drives me nuts. I can't do that. So, I did that. Open my soda. I'm going to take a drink and then I'm going to do my countdown. So here we go. 3, 2, 1, now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy here on the wonderful world of weirdness. My name is Roger Hanson, and today I am going to continue where I left off. I was discussing operations and projects that were going on within DARPA. Now, before I was able to get through all of it, I knew I was running a little bit heavy on time, so I decided to take a break and come back and talk to you further about Project Agile and Project Bluebird, which were programs and projects that were involved in DARPA. Now, with that being said, I will go ahead and get on to to my reading for these projects. First, I'm going to start out with Project Agile. Now, Project Agile was a covert initiative led by DARPA in the late 1950s and 1960s, which became part of the United States Cold War strategy, particularly with regards to unconventional warfare tactics. The project was designed to develop and implement new forms of military strategies and technologies aimed at countering the growing influence of the Soviet Union in the global geopolitical landscape. Now, while DARPA's usual focus has been on technology innovation, Project Agile specifically targeted unconventional methods of warfare and intelligence gathering. It included psychological warfare, counterinsurgency operations, and other covert military actions that could be deployed in conflicts of the Cold War era. Now, as the Cold War tensions escalated, the U.S. military and intelligence agencies began to recognize the growing importance of asymmetric warfare, fighting strategies that didn't rely solely on conventional military engagements. The Soviet Union and its allies were already involved in a variety of proxy conflicts around the world. often backing insurgencies and revolutionary movements in places like South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Now, to combat this, the U.S. military needed new tools and methods that were flexible, discreet, and capable of working in complex, irregular environments. DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, whichever you want to call it, was established in 1958 in response to the launch of the Sputnik by the Soviet Union. Now, one of its key roles was to explore cutting-edge technologies that could help maintain U.S. military supremacy. As part of this mission, DARPA launched Project Agile, which was tasked with developing unconventional warfare methods, specifically for the areas of psychological warfare, counterinsurgency, and small-scale covert operations. Now, the core objective of Project Agile was to create tactics and technologies that would allow the United States to fight and win in conflicts that were not limited to traditional battlefields. This included supporting military operations and intelligence gathering in situations where conventional warfare strategies would be insufficient or impractical. Now, the project's main goals were to develop psychological warfare technologies, counterinsurgency tactics, and small-scale covert operations, and technological innovations to support these objectives. Now, psychological warfare involved using media, propaganda, and other methods to influence both enemy combatants and civilian populations in conflict zones. Now, counterinsurgency was focused on developing ways to combat guerrilla warfare tactics used by insurgent groups in small-scale covert operations aimed at supporting special operation forces with sabotage, espionage, and clandestine activities. Technological innovations was also key, providing the tools and methods necessary for modern warfare strategies that could be used in covert and asymmetric conflicts. One of the most significant components of Project Agile was its emphasis on psychological warfare. This was largely based on a realization that winning the hearts and minds of local populations in conflict zones could be as decisive as military victories on the ground. Now, through various methods, such as propaganda, leaflets, radio broadcasts, and even controlled media messaging, the project sought to shift public opinion in favor of U.S. interests and against the Soviet Union and its allies. Psychological warfare was not limited to just promoting U.S. ideas. It also involved strategic disinformation campaigns that sought to confuse and demoralize enemy forces. For example, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. deployed psychological operations teams to use loudspeakers and leaflets to spread messages of confusion among Viet Cong soldiers and sympathizers. Now, Project Agile provided the funding for such operations and helped create a framework for psychological warfare that would be used throughout the Cold War. Another primary focus on Project Agile was counterinsurgency, particularly in regions where communist insurgents, supported by the Soviet Union and China, were destabilizing governments. The U.S. sought to build and train local militias and governments to fight back against these insurgencies without relying on the heavy hand of the U.S. military. Now, the most famous of these efforts occurred in Vietnam, where the U.S. attempted to train the South Vietnamese forces in counterinsurgency techniques as part of its broader military and political strategy. Project Agile's success in developing counterinsurgency tactics is somewhat mixed. On the one hand, the project provided vital training and expertise that helped form the foundation for future counterinsurgency doctrines. On the other hand, the lack of effectiveness in applying these tactics in countries like Vietnam led to significant military and political setbacks for the U.S. In addition to its focus on human intelligence and psychological operations, Project Agile also aimed to develop new technologies that would assist U.S. forces in unconventional warfare. One of the most important technologies developed during the project was the use of aerial surveillance and reconnaissance drones. While the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, was still in its infancy, DARPA and its collaborators explored how they could be used to gather intelligence without exposing personnel to enemy fire. These early UAVs were the precursors to sophisticated drones that would later become a staple in modern warfare. The development of specialized communication systems also played a key role in unconventional warfare strategies. During the Cold War, maintaining secure and efficient communications between covert operations, local forces, and military command centers was critical. Project Agile funded the development of secure communication systems, which allowed for real-time intelligence sharing and coordination in difficult environments. While Project Agile itself was not a failure, its legacy is complex and multifaceted. The primary reason for its mixed success was that many of the tactics and technologies developed during the project were simply too difficult to apply effectively in real-world situations. For example, counterinsurgency tactics were based on the assumption that local governments would be receptive to U.S. help, but in many cases, they were not. Furthermore, the idea of winning the hearts and minds of the people proved to be far more difficult than originally anticipated. Psychological warfare campaigns, while somewhat successful in certain cases, were also limited by the fact that they were often too overt or poorly coordinated. For example, in Vietnam, the use of leaflets and radio broadcasts was not as effective in countering the well-established communist propaganda machine. Nonetheless, the insights gained from Project Agile significantly influenced the U.S. military's approach to unconventional warfare in the years that followed. The lessons learned during the project were used in subsequent conflicts, including the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq. Project Agile also laid the groundwork for the development of more advanced psychological operation techniques and led to the expansion of DARPA's focus on cognitive and behavioral sciences. These disciplines have continued to be integral in military strategy, especially as the U.S. military increasingly relies on drones, cyber warfare, and information operations to shape the battlefield. While Project Agile remains one of DARPA's most enigmatic and controversial Cold War-era initiatives, its core objectives, countering Soviet influence and advancing unconventional warfare techniques, were crucial in shaping military strategies. Although the project's tactics and technologies were not universally successful, it provided significant lessons that have influenced modern military operations. The research and innovation born out of Project Agile contributed to future military conflicts and provided the U.S. military with new tools for information warfare, covert operations, and psychological tactics that will continue to be used throughout the Cold War and beyond. Now, with that being done, I'm going to move on to Project Bluebird. This is Project Bluebird for you. So, Project Bluebird was a secret research initiative funded by the U.S. government through DARPA in the 1950s and the 1960s as well, and was an early experiment in psychological manipulation with a particular focus on mind control and behavioral modification. While many aspects of this project remain classified, it is believed to have been one of the precursor programs to the more notorious MKUltra project. The research conducted under Project Bluebird laid the foundation for later experiments that sought to understand and potentially harness the power of human psychology for intelligence operations and military applications. The primary objective of Project Bluebird was to explore methods of mind control and alteration of the subject's psychological state and the manipulation of behavior in individuals. While the official justification for the program focused on the potential military and intelligence applications of these technologies, such as interrogation techniques and manipulating enemy behavior, the more alarming implications of such research quickly became apparent as a covert program. Bluebird involved a range of experimental techniques, some of which would eventually become associated with the CIA's MKUltra project, most notably the use of drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological stress to alter the minds of subjects. Now, during the Cold War, as tension between the United States and the Soviet Union grew, both superpowers sought to develop methods of psychological warfare to influence enemy actions, gather intelligence, and manipulate individuals in key positions. The belief that controlling the minds of individuals could lead to an advantage in military intelligence operations became a focal point for DARPA and the CIA. This led to programs like Bluebird, which aimed to explore the potential of such techniques, and later MKUltra, which would expand upon and refine these methods. One of the key elements of Project Bluebird was the study of drugs and their effects on human behavior. Researchers investigated substances such as LSD and other hallucinogens, which were believed to have the potential to alter the person's perception of reality and behavior. These substances were seen as potential tools for controlling the minds of enemies or subjects of interrogation. It was hypothesized that by administrating these drugs to individuals, they could be made more suggestible, more compliant, and even completely subjugated to the will of an interrogator. The use of LSD in particular became a central focus on research, and it was widely believed that Bluebird was one of the first projects to explore the possibility of using the substance for mind control purposes. The U.S. government was interested in LSD as a potential means of breaking prisoners during interrogation, forcing them to reveal classified information or to gain confessions that would not be forthcoming under normal circumstances. However, the risk and ethical issues surrounding the use of mind-altering substances soon became apparent. In many cases, the subjects who were dosed with LSD experienced severe psychological distress, including paranoia, delusion, and extreme confusion. These reactions were often unpredictable and led to unintended consequences, making it difficult for researchers to achieve the desired results. While much of the focus of Project Bluebird was on the use of drugs, researchers also explored other avenues of mind control. Hypnosis was another technique that was investigated, with the belief that it could be used to induce a state of heightened suggestibility or even alter the behavior of such subjects. Hypnosis, like LSD, was seen as a way to bypass the conscious mind and directly influence the subconscious mind, potentially leading to long-term behavioral changes. The use of hypnosis in the context of interrogation and psychological manipulation became a subject of intense study. The experiments were conducted to determine how effective it might be in controlling the actions of individuals. In addition to drugs and hypnosis, Project Bluebird also delved into the potential of sensory deprivation and isolation as methods of mind control. Subjects were placed in environments that severely restricted their sensory input, often using techniques such as blindfolds, earplugs, and sensory isolating tanks. The goal was to explore how isolation and sensory deprivation could disrupt the individual's perception of reality and lead to psychological changes that might be exploited for military and intelligence purposes. The hope was that such techniques would render individuals more susceptible to suggestion and control, making them easier to manipulate or brainwash. Despite the apparent lack of success in many of the experiments, Project Bluebird was influential in shaping the direction of future psychological and behavioral research in the U.S. government. In particular, the project's experiments with drugs and mind control laid the groundwork for more expansive MK Ultra MK Ultra project, which began in the early 1950s. MK Ultra expanded on the ideas explored by Bluebird, using a wider range of substances and techniques in an effort to refine and develop methods of mind control. It also saw the involvement of a broader network of institutions, including universities, hospitals, and private contractors, in order to push the boundaries of psychological research further. Project Bluebird's legacy remains somewhat obscure, primarily due to the classified nature of the research and the destruction of many of the program's records. However, it is clear that the project's focus on mind control, behavioral modification, and psychological manipulation played a significant role in the development of later U.S. intelligence programs. In particularly, the CIA's MK Ultra project, which ran throughout the 1950s and 1960s, was directly influenced by the ideas and experiments initiated in Bluebird. While MK Ultra took the research even further, incorporating more sophisticated techniques and a wider range of substances. The groundwork for this project was laid by the work done under Bluebird. One of the most controversial aspects of Project Bluebird and later MKUltra was the lack of information. No, it was the lack of informed consent for the individuals involved in the experiments. Many of the subjects were unaware that they were part of a covert government program, and they were often subjected to dangerous and harmful experiments without their knowledge or approval. In some cases, individuals were selected as subjects because they were already involved in voluntary or criminal situations, or vulnerable. They were already involved in vulnerable or criminal situations, making it easier for researchers to manipulate or control them. The ethical violations associated with these programs became a significant part of the public outcry that eventually led to congressional investigations and a broader debate about government-sponsored research on human subjects. While Project Bluebird itself was eventually overshadowed by MKUltra, it represented an important chapter in the history of government-sponsored research into human behavior and mind control. The project's focus on drugs, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation provided critical insights into the way in which the mind can be altered and manipulated, and its research helped shape the direction of future programs that sought to explore the limits of psychological control. Ultimately, however, the experiments conducted during Bluebird and MKUltra raised serious ethical questions about the use of human subjects in psychological research and the potential dangers of trying to control human behavior through unconventional means. The Bluebird, no, the Project Bluebird was an early and significant attempt by the U.S. government to explore the potential of psychological manipulation and mind control as tools for military and intelligence operations. Although the project was largely unsuccessful in its stated goals, it laid the groundwork for future programs, including MKUltra, that would continue to explore the boundaries of human psychology. The legacy of Project Bluebird is a controversial one, and it raises difficult questions about the ethics of psychological experiments and the potential abuse of power in covert government operations. While much of the research conducted during the project was deemed ineffective or counterproductive, its influence on later intelligence programs remains undeniable, and the ethical issues surrounding such research continues to provoke debate to this day. Okay, so we have those two taken care of, and I wanted to get through those two first before I went on with the next part of what I wanted to talk about. Now, from this point on, where I'm going to start out at is I'm wanting to talk about Operation Paperclip, or and go from there. Or no, actually, I wanna finish off what I started there, so that because talking about MKUltra and DARPA, actually, just talking about DARPA, I can't end it with just that. I need to actually go into Operation Mockingbird, which is going to be the final part of this when it comes to DARPA and their affiliation with um, all of this and what was going on during that time period. So let me go ahead and get into that. So Operation Mockingbird was a covert Central Intelligence Agency program initiated in the early years of the Cold War that aimed to influence domestic and international media for purposes aligned with U.S. foreign policy and intelligence objectives. Emerging in the aftermath of World War II, in the beginning of intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, the operation reflected a broader struggle for ideological dominance. The need to control information and narrative became paramount, and the U.S. intelligence community turned to the media as one of the most effective tools for mass influence. Operation Mockingbird began in earnest under the direction of Frank Wisner, who was appointed head of the CIA's Office of Policy Coordination in 1948. Wisner was responsible for overseeing covert operations and soon recognized the media's potential as a weapon in psychological and ideological warfare. Through strategic recruitment and financial incentives, the CIA began cultivating relationships with journalists, editors, publishers, and news agencies, both within the United States and abroad. These individuals were used to plant stories, suppress others, and generally ensure that public discourse aligned with the strategic goals of the U.S. government during the Cold War. Now, the influence of Operation Mockingbird extended into nearly every major media outlet of the time. Prominent newspapers such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and major television networks like CBS were all implicated through the full extent of their cooperation. Now, though the full extent of their cooperation has never been fully disclosed. Journalists and media executives were either knowingly or unknowingly complicit. Some were on the CIA payroll, while others were approached under patriotic pretenses, encouraged to help protect American democracy from communist infiltration and influence. The rationale presented by the CIA was often framed as a moral imperative to counter Soviet propaganda. Among the notable figures alleged to have had connections to the program was Philip Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post. According to various reporters and later investigations, Graham played a key role in facilitating contacts between the CIA and the press. His cooperation helped the agency develop a network of trusted media operatives who would promote or suppress content as directed. Similarly, Joseph Alsop, a widely read syndicated columnist, was said to have written pieces that were influenced by the CIA's perspective. These individuals, while prominent in the journalistic establishment, blurred the lines between editorial independence and state-driven messaging. The purpose of Operation Mockingbird was not merely to support U.S. policy. It was to actively mold public perception, both domestically and abroad. Internationally, the CIA used friendly media outlets to shape foreign opinion on key geopolitical matters. This included promoting pro-American leaders, demonizing socialist or nationalist movements, and influencing elections. In countries such as Italy, France, and West Germany, the CIA worked with local journalists to discredit communists and advocate for NATO-aligned political candidates. The effort was comprehensive, including written press, radio broadcasts, film, and later television programming. In addition to traditional news media, the CIA also engaged in cultural propaganda under the broader umbrella of psychological operations. The agency funded literary journals, cultural exhibitions, film productions, and even academic conferences. One of the most famous examples was the CIA's role in producing the animated version of George Orwell's Animal Farm, which was adapted to emphasize the danger of totalitarianism and promote anti-communist sentiments. These operations were often carried out through front organizations such as the Congress of Cultural Freedom, which received CIA funding and presented itself as an independent intellectual body. The full scope of Operation Mockingbird began to unravel during the 1970s when increased scrutiny of intelligence agencies led to congressional investigations. The Church Committee, chaired by Senator Frank Church in 1975, was tasked with investigating abuses by the CIA, FBI, and NSA. During its hearings, the committee revealed the extent of the CIA's penetration into the media. The revelation shocked many Americans and raised serious concerns about press freedom and integrity of democratic institutions. According to the committee's findings, the CIA maintained ties with more than 400 journalists around the world, many of whom were working covertly to promote agency interests. One of the more startling revelations involved Carl Bernstein, the investigative journalist best known for his reporting on the Watergate scandal. In a 1977 article for Rolling Stone magazine, Bernstein alleged that over 400 journalists had maintained covert ties to the CIA. Some were freelancers who occasionally submitted stories, while others were full-time employees of major news organizations. Bernstein's expose reignited public concern about government manipulation of the press and the potential erosion of democratic accountability. The implications of Operation Mockingbird continue to be debated today. Critics argue that the operation represents one of the most significant violations of journalistic ethics in American history. By compromising the independence of the press, the CIA undermined one of the fundamental pillars of democratic society. The covert nature of the operation meant that the American public was unaware of the manipulation taking place behind the scenes. While the Cold War context provides some rationale for the actions taken, the broader impact on public trust and transparency has been lasting. Supporters of the operation, or at least those who seek to contextualize it, argue that it was a necessary response to Soviet propaganda efforts. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union heavily invested in media propaganda, funding communist newspapers and broadcasting pro-Soviet messages through international outlets. The CIA's actions, they argue, were part of a global information war in which the United States had to compete. However, even among those sympathetic to the national security arguments, there is general agreement that the lack of oversight and the potential for abuse were serious concerns. Despite the exposure of Operation Mockingbird, some suspect that elements of the program have been pers- have that that some suspect that elements of the program may have persisted in altered forms. The relationships between intelligence agencies and media outlets did not vanish after the Church Committee. While more cautious and oversight were while more caution and oversight were introduced, the question remains as to whether intelligence agencies continue to influence media narratives in subtle or indirect ways. In a world of increasing information warfare, the temptation to shape narratives persists. In recent decades, new revelations about media manipulation, disinformation campaigns, and government leaks have reignited concerns about the legacy of Operation Mockingbird. The operation serves as a historical example of how intelligence agencies can extend their reach far beyond espionage and into the very institutions meant to hold them accountable. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of conflating national security with editorial independence. Another area of continued speculation involves the potential overlap between Operation Mockingbird and other Cold War era programs, such as Operation Gladio. While Mockingbird focused on media manipulation and Gladio on establishing paramilitary stay-behind networks in Europe, both operations were coordinated through overlapping intelligence circles. Some researchers suggest that Mockingbird media assets may have been used to obscure or justify certain Gladio operations, particularly during moments of political unrest in Europe. However, the available documentation on this subject is sparse, and many of the related records remain classified or only partially declassified. Operation Mockingbird also raises questions about the ethical responsibility of journalists and news organizations. During the height of the program, many individuals and institutions were willing to cooperate with the CIA, either for patriotic reasons or financial gain. The complicity of the media industry suggests a broader institutional failure, one of which the lines between state and press becomes dangerously blurred. This erosion of boundaries has left a lasting impact on the credibility of journalism and continues to fuel distrust in the media today. While many of the individuals involved in Operation Mockingbird are no longer alive, their legacy remains embedded in the institutions they once served. The CIA's historical efforts to shape the public mind continue to be referenced in discussions about propaganda, media bias, and the role of intelligence agencies in democratic societies. The declassified records and historical analysis serve as a reminder that the struggle for narrative control is not confined to the past but remains a central issue in modern governments. or governance. Operation Mockingbird stands as one of the most significant and controversial covert operations in the history of American intelligence. It reveals how powerful the media can be as a tool of influence and how fragile the safeguards are that protects its independence. Though originally conceived as a bulwark against communists or communism, the program ultimately compromises the very freedoms it sought to defend. The operation continues to be a subject of scholarly study, journalistic inquiry, and public debate, symbolizing the complex relationship between power, secrecy, and the truth. As long as governments engage in covert operations and seek to influence public opinion, the lessons of Operation Mockingbird will remain relevant. All right, so let me see how much time I have here. Yeah, I'm at 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into Operation Paperclip now. After I did Mockingbird, I'm going to start out with Operation Paperclip and go from there. And we can go on from there to the next part that I'm gonna bring up. So when I first started this season, I started out with JFK's assassination, and I went through the conspiracies for what would be considered modern day conspiracies, and we went finally through DARPA, and I covered that, and then finished that off with Operation Mockingbird. So now I'm going to start out here with Operation Paperclip so that we can kind of get an idea, go deeper into what we were talking about when it comes to the freaking deep state, and also concerning nuclear weapons and stuff of that nature. Because if you remember when I was talking about JFK, I talked about the programs that were going on concerning the nuclear race, the nuclear power race, and space and all that stuff. So with that, the best place to do is start out with Operation Paperclip and go from there. So here we go. Now, Operation Paperclip was a secret program initiated by the United States government following the conclusion of World War II, with the goal of recruiting German scientists, engineers, and technicians, many of whom had been involved in the Nazi war machine, into American scientists and military research sectors. The project was designed to advance the U.S. position during the early stages of the Cold War, particularly in response to fear that the Soviet Union would capture and utilize these same talent pool, this same talent pool for its own strategic interests. The program brought over 1,600 individuals from Germany to the United States and played a fundamental role in shaping modern American military technology, space exploration, and intelligence operations. The origins of Operation Paperclip can be traced back to 1945, as Allied forces began to occupy German territories and uncover the full scope of scientific advancements achieved by the Nazi regime. Despite the regime's horrific policies and Cold War crime and the horrific policies and war crimes. Many of its scientific personnel had conducted cutting-edge research in fields like rocketry, aerodynamics, physics, chemistry, and medicine. As the Cold War began to take shape, the geopolitical urgency of preventing this intellectual capital from falling into Soviet hands led American officials to make pragmatic, if morally questionable, decisions. The program was overseen by the Joint Intelligence Agency, Objectives Agency, which is JIOA, operating under the umbrella of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which later evolved into the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. One of the most prominent individuals brought to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip was Wernher von Braun, a rocket engineer who had served as the technical director of the Nazi V-2 missile program. Von Braun and his team were directly involved in developing the rockets used against Allied cities during the war, particularly in London and Antwerp. Despite their background, von Braun and dozens of his colleagues were moved to the U.S., where they were settled primarily at Fort Bliss in Texas and later at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Von Braun would go on to become a central figure in NASA, where he played a pivotal role in the development of the Saturn V rocket that launched the Apollo missions to the moon. The ethics of employing individuals like von Braun were heavily scrutinized. Many of the scientists brought over under Operation Paperclip were members of the Nazi Party or had collaborated with the SS. In some cases, they had directly overseen or benefited from forced labor at concentration camps. For instance, the Mittelwerk facility where the V-2 rockets were produced used prisoners from Dora Mittelbau concentration camp under horrific conditions. Thousands died from abuse, starvation, or execution. Despite this, official records were sanitized or ignored to make these individuals appear less complicit in war crimes, facilitating their acceptance into U.S. institutions. Another key figure recruited through the program was Dr. Hubertus Stronghold, often referred to as the father of space medicine. In the United States, Stronghold had been involved in human experimentation programs conducted at the Dachau concentration camp. No, in the United States, father of space medicine in the United States. Then Stronghold had been involved in human experimentation programs conducted at the Dachau concentration camp, although he denied direct participation. Despite these serious allegations, he was appointed to high-level positions in the U.S. aerospace medicine and contributed to the development of spaceflight medical protocols used by both the U.S. Air Force and NASA. His legacy became controversial in later decades, with institutions renaming buildings and awards previously bearing his name. The scope of Operation Paperclip extended beyond space and rocketry. It also encompassed experts in aviation, technology, chemical weapons, and biological warfare. Some scientists worked on classified research for U.S. Army's Chemical Corps and the Edgewood Arsenal. Others contributed to early Cold War research in mind control, interrogation techniques, and psychotropic drugs, which would later become associated with CIA programs like MKUltra. While there is no formal admission that paperwork recruits were involved in such projects, circumstantial evidence and declassified documents suggest that their knowledge and expertise were utilized in broader intelligence and defense contexts. The secrecy surrounding Operation Paperclip was extensive. Initially, President Harry Truman authorized the program with the condition that no individual with known Nazi affiliations or war crimes should be allowed entry. However, this restriction was frequently ignored or circumvented. The JIOA used falsified documents, removed damning details from personal records, and gave scientists clean security clearance despite objections from other branches of the government. In some cases, scientists entered the country under aliases or received naturalization quietly to avoid public scrutiny. The moral dilemma of Operation Paperclip reflected broader post-war contradictions. On one hand, the United States had emerged as a champion of democracy and human rights, a stance reinforced during the Nuremberg trials that prosecuted leading Nazi officials. On the other hand, the same government engaged in pragmatic alliances with former Nazis when it served American interests in the Cold War. Public knowledge of Operation Paperclip remained limited until the 1970s, when investigative journalists and historians began to uncover its extent through Freedom of Information Act requests and declassified documents. In 1985, a U.S. Department of Justice investigation through its Office of Special Investigations, OSI, found that at least 16 paperclip scientists had been involved in war crimes or crimes against humanity, though none were prosecuted. Some were retired, while others were already passed away. The revelation sparked public debate about the ethical boundaries of scientific collaboration and the lingering influence of former Nazi operatives in American science and industry. The Cold War environment offered a rationale that, at the time, overrode other considerations. American defense officials believed that failure to recruit Nazi scientists would allow the Soviets to gain the advantage. Indeed, the Soviet Union had its own version of Operation Paperclip, forcibly relocating German scientists to assist in its weapons and space programs. In the zero-sum logic of Cold War geopolitics, national security interests eclipsed moral imperatives, creating a legacy that still raises difficult questions. Operation Paperclip also had significant implications for the development of the U.S. military-industrial complex. The integration of German scientific talent helped establish long-term partnerships between government agencies, defense contractors, and academic institutions. This synergy fueled rapid advancements in missile technology, surveillance systems, and aerospace engineering. At the same time, it created a precedent for secret programs and opaque recruitment practices that would characterize American intelligence operations throughout the 20th century. In cultural memory, Operation Paperclip remained largely in the shadows until the publication of books such as Operation Paperclip by Annie Jacobsen, which offered detailed narratives of the individuals involved and the bureaucratic machinations that enabled their recruitment. The revelations contained in such works provoked broader discussions about the price of progress, the ethical limitations of statecraft, and the complex legacy of war. Despite its controversy, Operation Paperclip achieved its immediate strategic objectives. The expertise of its recruits contributed significantly to American superiority in space exploration, ballistic missile development, and various scientific disciplines. However, this came at the cost of compromising justice and accountability. While the Cold War context helps explain the rationale behind the program, it does not absolve the decision made or their consequences. The legacy of Operation Paperclip invites ongoing reflections about the intersection of science, ethics, and national interest. It serves as a case study in the difficult choices faced by policymakers during times of geopolitical tensions and the extent to which democratic societies may sacrifice principles in pursuit of security. The full impact of this program is still being evaluated as newly declassified documents and archival research continues to shed light on this secret chapter of American history. Now, we go from there to Karen Silkworth. Now, Karen Silkworth is an American chemical technician and labor union activist who became widely known for her role in exposing safety violations and contaminations at the NUMEC Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation plant in Crescent, Pennsylvania in the 1970s. Now, Silkworth's death under mysterious circumstances and the allegations of radiation contamination and safety violations she exposed have remained a significant point of controversy and a topic of public intrigue. The case against further attention due to suspicions surrounding her death, the role of the nuclear industry in covering up such issues, and whether the federal government and companies like NUMEC were responsible for her ultimate demise. Silkworth worked at the NUMEC facility, which was involved in the production of plutonium fuel rods, a key component in the development of nuclear reactors and weapons. NUMEC, which is NUMEC, like many nuclear plants, had numerous safety issues, some of which were allegedly covered up by management. Silkworth's work in the laboratory included monitoring plutonium, and it was there that she began to notice troubling irregularities. In particularly, she found that workers were being exposed to significant levels of radiation contamination. Silkworth grew increasingly concerned that these exposures were being ignored by the company and its management. One of the key allegations Silkwood, I kept saying Silkworth, it's actually Silkwood, Karen Silkwood. One of the key allegations Silkwood made was that NUMEC was falsifying records to hide the extent of the radiation exposure that its workers were subjected to. She claimed that the company was allowing workers to operate in unsafe conditions and that safety procedures were not being followed. In some cases, she alleged NUMEC was deliberately misreporting levels of radiation exposure to avoid scrutiny from the federal government and regulatory agencies. Silkwood's work was initially motivated by a desire to protect her fellow workers, but as her investigations deepened, she came to realize the broader implications of the safety violations she was uncovering. Silkwood's concerns eventually led her to approach the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, OCAW, seeking support to expose NUMEC's practices. The union, which had long been active in advocating for rights of workers in the nuclear industry, took Silkwood's allegations seriously. She became an active member of the union and worked with them to gather evidence against NUMEC. Silkwood's courage in taking these steps in a high-stakes, highly secretive industry put her at the forefront of a growing effort to hold the nuclear industry accountable for unsafe practices. Silkwood's whistleblowing efforts were not without personal cost. As she gathered evidence, she experienced increasing harassment and intimidation, both from NUMEC and possibly from other forces. She was subjected to surveillance and threats, and it became clear that she was under intense pressure from various interests to stop her investigation. However, despite the threats, Silkwood persisted in her efforts to expose the dangerous working conditions of NUMEC. In the weeks leading up to her death, Silkwood had gathered enough evidence to substantiate her claims. She had taken photographs of safety violations at the NUMEC plant and had compiled a dossier of documents showing that the company had deliberately falsified safety documents. Had deliberately falsified safety records. She was also scheduled to meet with New York Times reporter David Burnham, who had expressed interest in writing a story about her findings. The details she had uncovered were explosive and could have had a significant impact on the nuclear industry and its regulatory framework. On the night of November 13th, 1974, Silkworth was killed in a car accident under suspicious circumstances. She was driving to meet the reporter with the evidence she had gathered, but she never arrived. Silkwood's car was found off the road, with the accident being described as a single car crash. However, there were several strange aspects to her death. First, it was discovered that she had been heavily contaminated with plutonium at the time of her death, even though she had not been working with the material recently. Secondly, her car was found to have been involved in a collision with another vehicle, although no such vehicle was ever identified. Some believe that Silkwood's car may have been deliberately forced off the road, making her death look like an accident. The aftermath of Silkworth's death sparked widespread controversy, with many of her colleagues, union members, and supporters believing that she had been murdered to prevent her from exposing the dangerous practices at NUMEC. There were allegations that her death was a cover-up by the nuclear industry and possibly other government or private entities that stood to lose from the revelations she was about to make. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, which oversaw the nuclear industry, began to investigate into Silkwood's claims, but many felt that the inquiry was inadequate and did not address the deeper issues she had raised about worker safety and industry practices. Silkwood's story gained significant national attention and became a focal point for those advocating for nuclear safety and labor rights. In the years following her death, the Silkwood case was cited by critics of the nuclear industry as a symbol of the industry's disregard for worker safety and its willingness to go to great lengths to protect itself from public scrutiny. Silkwood's death was the subject of several investigations, and in 1976, her family filed a lawsuit against NUMEC and the parent company of NUMEC, Per McGee Corporation, accusing them of gross negligence, harassment, and wrongful death. In 1979, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Silkwood family, awarding them damages for the wrongful death of Karen Silkworth. The court concluded that NUMEC and Kurt McGee were liable for her death, but the case did not provide definitive answers about who was ultimately responsible for Silkwood's tragic demise. Despite this legal victory, the case has never been fully resolved, and many questions about the circumstances surrounding her death remain unanswered. The allegations made by Karen Silkwood were significant, but they highlighted the dangers of working in the nuclear industry, the potential for corporate misconduct, and the lengths to which powerful interests would go to protect themselves from liability. Silkwood's story became an important part of the broader movement for workplace safety and the regulation of the nuclear industry. Her death galvanized public interest in the environmental and health risks associated with nuclear energy, and she became a symbol of the struggles for workers' rights in industries that deal with dangerous materials. Silkwood's legacy lives on in the efforts to improve safety standards in the nuclear industry and to ensure that whistleblowers are protected. And with that, I'm going to end that part right there. I keep getting strange messages. I think somebody's trying to send me a message on Teams. So right there, I'm going to go ahead and pause on it. And I think I may have already done the one on Operation Paperclip. It sounds familiar, like I've read it. I know I've got it, but I think I may have already read it. But actually, I could probably just go ahead and get into some of this too because, I got enough time. Let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and continue from there with Bikini Atoll, just to go right on through with the nuclear stuff so that we can kind of go through that and what was going on in the South Pacific, or the Pacific. Now, the nuclear testing carried out by Bikini Atoll stands as one of the most stark and haunting episodes of the early Cold War era as well, revealing the immense destructive power of atomic weapons as well as the human, environmental, and geopolitical consequences of such experimentation. Located in the Marshall Islands, a remote chain of islands in the Pacific Ocean, Bikini Atoll was chosen by the United States as a primary site for atmospheric nuclear testing shortly after the conclusion of World War II. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 23 nuclear tests on or near Bikini Atoll, fundamentally altering the island's ecology and leaving a legacy of contamination, displacement, and controversy that persists to this day. The origins of the nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll can be traced to the rapid escalation of atomic weapon development following the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. With Japan's surrender in World War II concluded, the United States found itself in possession of an immensely powerful new technology, but lacking comprehensive data on its effects. Officials within the U.S. military, particularly the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, sought to conduct a series of tests to examine how nuclear weapons would affect naval fleets, military infrastructure, and the environment. These tests would also serve as a geopolitical show of force during the early stages of what would become the Cold War, sending a clear message to both allies and rivals, particularly the Soviet Union. Bikini Atoll was selected due to its geographical isolation, strategic location within the U.S.-administered Trust Territories, or territory of the Pacific Islands, and its relatively sparse population. In early 1946, the native inhabitants of Bikini, numbering about 167 people, were asked by U.S. officials to vacate their homeland for the good of mankind. The Bikinians, under the impression that their relocation would be temporary and that they would be able to return shortly after the test, reluctantly agreed. They were moved to the uninhabited and resource-poor island of Rongerik, an inhospitable location that soon proved incapable of supporting the community due to its inadequate food and water supplies. This marked the beginning of a prolonged period of displacement and suffering for the Bikini people, who would never permanently return to their ancestral homeland. The first series of tests, known as Operation Crossroads, took place in 1946 and consisted of two detonations, Test Able and Test Baker. Test Able, detonated on July the 1st, was an aerial blast conducted at an altitude of approximately 520 feet above a fleet of 95 surplus warships anchored in the lagoon, including battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, and submarines. The bomb, codenamed Gilda, missed its intended target and inflicted less damage than anticipated. Nonetheless, it offered the military valuable data about the effects of a nuclear blast on naval equipment and material. However, it was the second Test Baker, that shocked observers and researchers with its unexpected and terrifying results. Test Baker was an underwater detonation conducted on July 25, 1946, at a depth of 90 feet below the lagoon's surface. The resulting explosion produced a colossal column of water and debris that rose thousands of feet into the air, vaporized several ships instantly, and showered nearby vessels with the surrounding no no and showered nearby vessels in the surrounding area with radioactive fallout. Unlike Test Able, the Baker test revealed the pernicious effects of radioactive contamination. Ships that survived the blast were heavily irradiated and posed such a hazard that many had to be scuttled or dismantled. The realization that nuclear weapons could render entire areas uninhabitable through long-term contamination was a sobering development that underscored the destructive potential of these weapons far beyond their immediate explosive force. In subsequent years, further tests were conducted at Bikini, including the infamous Operation Castle series in 1954. Among these, the Castle Bravo test stands out as the most powerful and controversial of all. Detonated on March 1st, 1954, Castle Bravo was the first dry-fuel hydrogen bomb ever tested by the United States. Scientists had estimated the yield at approximately 5 megatons, but the actual explosion released 15 megatons of energy, making it the most powerful nuclear device ever detonated by the United States. The detonation was so intense that it vaporized a significant portion of the island, creating a crater over a mile in diameter and launched radioactive fallout across hundreds of miles. The consequences of the Castle Bravo test were catastrophic. The unexpected yield resulted in the contamination of nearby atolls, including Rongelap, Utrik, and Elegine, whose inhabitants were exposed to heavy doses of radiation. Many experienced acute radiation sickness, burns, hair loss, and long-term health complications such as cancer and birth defects. U.S. authorities evacuated these populations belatedly, and medical monitoring and compensation were often inadequate. The tests also affected Japanese citizens when the fishing boat Diago Fukuryu Maru Lucky Dragon Number 5 was caught in the fallout, resulting in the death of one crew member and widespread public outrage in Japan. This incident contributed to a growing anti-nuclear sentiment worldwide and raised serious ethical questions about the conduct of such tests. The environmental impact of the Bikini test was equally profound. the repeated nuclear detonations obliterated large swaths of the land, destroyed marine ecosystems, and rendered much of the soil and groundwater unsafe due to lingering radioactive isotopes such as cesium-137 and strontium-90. Scientists and radiation experts have since conducted numerous studies to assess the feasibility of resettlement, but the island remains largely uninhabitable due to the persistence of radioactive contamination. Efforts to decontaminate Bikini Atoll have met with limited success, and while some areas may appear visually pristine, they continue to pose health risks to potential residents. The U.S. government's handling of the Bikini test and their aftermath has faced considerable criticism, both domestically and internationally. Critics have pointed to the forced displacement of the Bikini people, the inadequate compensation for those affected by radiation exposure, and the long-term disregard for the well-being of the native populations of the Marshall Islands. Legal actions and advocacy campaigns eventually led to the establishment of the Compact of Free Association in 1986, which included provisions for trust funds and resettlement support. However, many islanders feel that the reparations do not fully address the magnitude of the harm inflicted upon their communities. The Bikini nuclear testing program also had significant implications for international arms control and public perception of nuclear weapons. The visual imagery and the media coverage of the test played a key role in shaping public consciousness about the dangers of atomic warfare. The mushroom clouds, the displaced islanders, and the radioactive wastelands became potent symbols of the potential annihilation that nuclear conflict could bring. These concerns contributed to global movements advocating for nuclear disarmament and led to the eventual negotiation of treaties aimed at limiting atmospheric and underwater testing, such as the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Despite the passing of decades, Bikini Atoll continues to occupy a unique place in the collective memory of the nuclear age. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its significance in the history of nuclear testing. The sunken warships from Operation Crossroads have become an artificial reef and a destination for recreational divers, while the surrounding waters teem with marine life that has remarkably adapted to the radioactive environment. Yet beneath this strange rebirth lies the unresolved legacy of human suffering, ecological damage, and the ethical dilemmas posed by military experimentation on vulnerable populations. In more recent times, the story of Bikini Atoll has served as a cautionary tale in discussions about nuclear policy, environmental justice, and indigenous rights. So, we went in there and got that covered, and now I want to talk about Mordecai Vanunu, and after that, I will be done. I believe that will actually bring it to a full episode. So Mordecai Vanunu was an Israeli former nuclear technician, and he became internationally known in 1986 when he exposed details of Israel's clandestine nuclear weapons program. His revelations provided the first substantial evidence that Israel possessed nuclear weapons, despite the nation's long-standing policy of deliberate ambiguity on the subject. The events surrounding Vanunu's disclosure, abduction, and lengthy imprisonment form one of the most notable episodes in the global discussion around nuclear proliferation and secrecy. Vanunu was born in Marrakesh, Morocco in 1954 into a Jewish family that had immigrated to Israel in the early 1960s. After serving in the Israeli military, he began working as a technician at the Negev Nuclear Research Center near Dimona in the Negev Desert. This facility was long suspected by foreign intelligence agencies and analysts to be the heart of Israel's nuclear weapons development program, though the Israeli government consistently avoided confirming or denying these suspicions. While working at Dimona, Vanunu became increasingly disillusioned with Israel's secrecy and military policies. He was particularly troubled by what he saw as the hypocrisy of Israel promoting itself as peace, seeking democracy while secretly developing weapons of mass destruction. Over the years, Vanunu grew more politically active and critical of Israeli policies, particularly regarding the Palestinians. Eventually, he was dismissed from his post, partly due to his outspoken political views and behavior. After leaving the nuclear facility, Vanunu traveled through Asia and Europe, eventually arriving in Australia, where he converted to Christianity. While in Sydney, he came into contact with journalists from the British newspaper, the Sunday Times. In 1986, he provided them with detailed information and photographs he had secretly taken inside the Dimona facility. These materials included technical specifications and diagrams that strongly suggested Israel had been producing platinum for nuclear weapons and had assembled a significant nuclear arsenal. The Sunday Times took great care to verify the authenticity of Vanunu's claims before publishing the story. After consulting with lead nuclear experts, the paper concluded that Israel had indeed developed nuclear weapons and possessed an arsenal of potentially over 100 warheads, placing it among the world's major nuclear powers. The resulting article, published in October of 1986, marked a turning point in global perceptions of Israel's nuclear capabilities. However, before the story was published, Vanunu was lured from London to Rome by a female Mossad agent posing as an American tourist named Cindy. In Rome, Vanunu was abducted by Israeli agents, drugged, and smuggled back to Israel on a boat. This covert operation violated Italian sovereignty and was never officially acknowledged by the Israeli government at the time. Once back in Israel, Vanunu was imprisoned, tried in secret, and convicted of treason and espionage. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, more than 11 of which he spent in solitary confinement. During his imprisonment, Vanunu became a cause célèbre for human rights and anti-nuclear activists around the world. Supporters saw him as a whistleblower who had acted out of conscience to expose a potentially destabilizing secret. Meanwhile, the Israeli government continues to portray him as a traitor who had jeopardized national security and violated the oath of secrecy he had taken as part of his role at the Dimona facility. After serving his full sentence, Vanunu was released from prison in 2004, but he remained subject to heavy restrictions. Israeli authorities placed him under a series of constraints, including bans on leaving the country, speaking to foreign journalists, and approaching foreign embassies. These restrictions were justified by the state on the grounds that he might still possess classified information that could harm Israel's security if disclosed. Vanunu has consistently denied this, stating that everything he knew was already made public decades ago. Despite repeated appeals to lift these restrictions, including interventions from international human rights organizations and foreign governments, Vanunu's movements and speech remains curtailed to this day. He has been arrested several times for violating the terms of his release, including for giving interviews or attempting to communicate with foreigners. His application to leave Israel and live abroad often cited his desire to join his wife in Norway, has been consistently denied by Israeli courts. Vanunu has stated repeatedly that he acted out of moral conviction and a belief in transparency and nuclear disarmament. He has argued that the people of Israel and the world have a right to know about nuclear programs that could have vast consequences on humanity. Over the years, he has also criticized the international community, particularly the United States, for ignoring Israel's nuclear program while aggressively pursuing non-proliferation policies against other nations. In the case of Mordechai Vanunu is widely viewed as emblematic of the tensions between national security, government secrecy, and individual conscience. It raises profound questions about the limits of whistleblowing, the ethical responsibility of citizens working within classified environments, and the policies of nuclear opacity practiced by some states, and policies of nuclear opacity practiced by some states. While Israel has never officially confirmed or denied having nuclear weapons, Vanunu's disclosures continue to be cited as the most credible evidence that the country developed such capabilities as early as the 1970s. To this day, Israel maintains its policy of nuclear ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying its possession of nuclear arms. This approach has allowed it to avoid direct scrutiny from international nuclear watchdogs and to maintain a strategic edge in the region without triggering arms races or treaty obligations. Meanwhile, Benunu remains a symbol of defiance and moral resistance to the state secrecy, viewed by some as a hero of transparency and others as a criminal who betrayed his country. The broader implications of the Benunu affair extend beyond Israel. His story contributes to the ongoing global debate over nuclear transparency, whistleblower protections, and the role of state secrecy in democrat societies. It also highlights the challenges posed by national security arguments in curtailing civil liberties, even long after the initial offense has occurred. The case has led many to question the balance between a state's right to defend itself and the public's right to know, especially when the consequences of nuclear warfare are so catastrophic. All right. So I was able to get through all of that, and I, I don't know. I like I said, I think I already did Operation Paperclip, but that's fine because I wanted to go back over that to kind of open up everything and go back into this area that I was discussing, kind of go over that some. So that is all of it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, like, subscribe, share, make comments, give some feedback in the comment section. Such a sexy voice. Oh, thank you, Galactic Fire T-shirt. You know it. I got that sexy voice going on, don't I? Sound like 007. But anyhow, thank you for your comment in the chat section, Galactic Fire. Like I said there, everybody, if you want to, or if you like this, like, subscribe, share, make comments. I love comments, not only in the chat section, but also in the comment section. Feel free to make a comment, and I will respond to them. Trust me, I will. All I ask is, be kind to one another. Don't be a dick, freaking respect each other's opinions and how they see things. And everybody has a right to their own opinion and their own way of looking at stuff. So as long as you do that, I have no problem with anything that's inside of the comment section. I don't like trolls, you know what I mean? So don't feed the trolls. Somebody comes in, starts trolling on the comments, I'll take care of them, but don't contribute to it. Don't get caught up in that, because that's not what we're about here on the wonderful world of weirdness. Okay. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a good day, good morning, good evening, whatever time of the day it is for you, and I will talk to you later. Bye.